All right. Welcome back to the Kate and Jerry show. I think that's the best name for it right now.
I think I better change my name to Tom, don't you?
Yeah. By the way, we'll go there real quick. I have a good friend, especially in high school, who was Tom. So it was the Tom and Jerry was always fun. So I'm glad that spans the ocean, by the way.
Of course, of course, of
Cool.
course.
So why don't you take us into the conversation we want to have on this episode, Kate, please?
So, Jerry, today we're going to be talking about the prison that we have been sold, the dogma, the tyranny of dogma that we have been sold, convinced, told is the way to do things, and then entraps us. And I'd like to start off with as being debt slaves from the moment that we leave, well, even before we go to college. So most people, certainly here and certainly with you guys, leave university, leave college with a mountain of debt that they've got to repay. So you've paid for a training, a professional qualification, but you're already a debt slave. So before you've even got a job, you're paying back, or you've got an obligation to be paying back a huge amount for your education, an obligation to be paying the taxman back. You might have an obligation to be paying your parents back for some extra money you borrowed them. You might have an obligation to be paying back on your car. So even by the time time you graduate, 22 or something like that, you're very young, you are already a debt slave. And sometimes I think, did the Roman Empire ever really fall? Or was that a story we were just told? Because that was an empire. That was an empire built on slavery. And sometimes it feels like it's the same, but it's just we're sold a debt slavery, and we work from work and work and work and work to pay off our mortgage. And when does it stop? So I think there's a sort of standard of living, or a way of living, or the sort of societal construct that we've been sold or brought up in, that we just get on the treadmill to keep serving without hitting pause and questioning, hang on a minute, what do I want? What if there's a different way of doing things? What if there is a road less traveled? Now, that's a book I've got on my bookshelf that I've still yet to read. I've had it on my bookshelf for about 10 years, so I will read it. But that's what I think is where people do get brave, when they pause to think, hang on a minute, we do live with this sort of tyranny of dogma of this is the way to do things, without hitting stop and questioning and checking in. Is it really? Do I want that?
I would say, again, I don't see it any different over here. And if anything, it's gotten worse as far as the going through us being told that this is the way you do this, and then incurring everything, the time, the money, the energy to do it. Because in the States, it's an extra 2 to 3 years. Now it's an extra 3 years, right? So now you've just extended your journey. You've extended your debt to achieve something that you want. So that's cool. You get to choose this future you want, yet it's pretty narrowed down. It's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you a lot of time. It's going to cost you a lot of energy. And then you get out, and then it's interesting. Again, you're waiting to be told where to go next. And I see this, and anybody listening to this, if you've gone through it, you'll acknowledge it. If you're going through it, you're going to have a hard time acknowledging it. But yet I'm trying to this point, I'm trying to speak to more of the students at this point, second and third year students, to get them to dig a little deeper, not into themselves, but to dig a little deeper. Has nothing to do with them, because I'm like, you guys are making a choice. Cool. Let's make sure you know what the next steps are. So this idea of you don't wait, right? Because in the States, you go to school, you graduate, you get a job. Well, think about that order. I'm like, no, you got to be thinking about the job and the job market and the impact on you, your time, your money, your energy, way before you need it. And that's what we're talking about here, right? So we get out, and then what? Right? And then what do? We go to work. So here in the States, we go to work for the corporate. We go to work for the big box. We go to work for the place that's doing it like everybody else and has been doing it like everybody else forever. And they built I would say they built a foundation, but yet, man, what they built on top of that foundation is not pretty and not something I want to replicate. Right. So again,
and you guys get no holiday as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we
That's
get way less. Yeah.
we don't know how you survive on 2 weeks a year or something,
Uh-huh.
if you're employed, and
Uh-huh.
come and do Europe in a fortnight. I'm
Well,
like, whoa, how?
and it's so funny, right? So in the States, people always want to talk about this money freedom, but it is a time freedom, right? How do I get my time back? By the way, you never get your time back, right? It's the one time, money, and energy. You can get your time, or sorry, time, money, and energy. You can get the money and the energy back. You never get your time back, right? So the
Yeah.
holidays, the kids, the families, right? So then you go through this, you've given up 7 years, you've invested all that time, money, and energy. Now you're thinking you're going to have some freedom. And well, what are you going to do? You're going to copy the system that created this. So
Mm.
I give a lot of credit, and they're frowned upon usually, right? You can't come out of school and start your own business. I'm like, what are their other choices, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not, we talked about the foundations and the basics and the business foundations to build upon. My other thing these days is to make sure these younger professionals, before they're professionals, understand the business basics, because if they understand the business basics, then they can ask better questions. So my goal here is not to turn everybody into a business owner. My goal is to increase the business knowledge, business literacy of
Yeah.
some of these people, so that when you sit across someone like me who has something to offer you, you can ask me the right questions so you can make a better decision for yourself and determine, what do I want to do to achieve this future outcome, right? Because we control the process, right? That's we talked about this too. We can control the process, not the outcome. We get confused early on. All we do is look at the outcome. We shoot for the outcome without understanding the process.
And I think it's recognizing, I think to be able to do that, it's really recognizing that the education system hasn't taught you this. The education system's taught you about, I don't know, Colonel Custer. I remember learning about him in history, whatever. But it's not necessarily taught you some of the practical life skills you need, because even if you don't own a business, your household's a business.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
you run, you've got income, you've got expenses.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that the education system doesn't teach you. And if you're just going to rely on what you've been taught in school to get through life, you're going to have a rough old time. And it's far easier to start taking personal responsibility for being curious and learning yeah, they say you don't have to run your own business, but if you are just curious and pick up more knowledge and more information, you don't become a factory worker, a slave to the system.
Well, a slave to the
Have
system. That's where this started. And I think that's a great,
yeah,
if you're not curious, you're going to be a slave to the system. And by
yeah,
the way, we get that a lot in the States. And it's interesting because many times people who aren't curious, who aren't looking for that next thing, are the ones complaining the most. I'm just going to say it out loud.
yeah,
Oh, reimbursement's not good enough. Oh, my corporate job is asking too much. Oh, this and that. And I'm like, but what have you done? What have you done to research? There's a lot of, I'm going to speak to the States. There's a lot of, you here. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. I'm like, we got to take some ownership here, right?
yeah,
Self-aware. There has to be self-awareness around this. And there has to be self-awareness that I chose a profession. I chose to pay a certain amount of money. I chose to invest my time and energy into that. And then I can't show up in front of a door and open it and go, oh, fuck, I didn't know what was on the other side of the door. No, that's all on you. That's all on you. And so you and I, as we mentioned before, have been on a long journey in this. And I went through a lot of this myself. I can't even sit here and begin to talk about how it started to break down and how I started to think different. Well, I could a little bit, but at least the high marks. But it takes self-awareness. It takes a lot of, this isn't what I thought it was. What is, well, forget, it doesn't even have to come from a bad place. What else is available to me?
yeah,
And by the way,
exactly.
in 2023, there is absolutely no excuse with the accessibility of resources and information in 2023 in front of you. You have absolutely zero excuses.
I think it is just about reigniting people's curiosity and people's interest. I think and to me, it really is about recognizing, look, the system has trained you, and this is the whole purpose of education, to work in a metaphorical factory. If you don't want that, then it's up to you to create something different. And if you just simply come at it from a point of curiosity of, well, what are the options? How could I do that? Well, how did Kate do that? How did Jerry do that? Ask the questions and be curious, and then all sorts of options will open up for you, and you don't have to be a cookie cutter in however it is you live your life. And that might not be your work life, it might be your personal life, whatever, doesn't matter, but you just create variety. And it is on you. It's about you taking the accountability, the ownership, the responsibility for your life and what your journey is. You get one shot at it. Like Jerry said a minute ago, you don't get your time back again. You get one shot at it. So with that one shot, what do you want to create? What do you want to be possible? Otherwise, you just sit in a position of blame, denial, and excuses, and well, that's just miserable.
I want to jump ahead one on this because we've talked about people coming up. Yet I see this right in established, right? I've mentioned this, and I've got to, we got to bring this to where where Kate and I both exist, and the people I'm talking to today, yesterday, tomorrow, they've been on this journey, they've been curious, and now they're years into this journey, and they're like, and literally, I was on a call yesterday. By the way, this is someone making over $1 million US dollars. Not a bad place to be. Ownership of something generating $1 million a year, right? We can talk about margins and everything, but let's just talk about top line, right? Right. I'm tired. I'm through with this. I'm done with it. And which is, oh my gosh, right? You're living the dream, right? You're living the American dream. I'm tired. I'm done with it. I'm through with this. I literally, a conversation, this is not made up, I had a week ago. And again, this curiosity, which is cool. This person had a curiosity to create something. And by the way, they created something different. And yet here they are 5 years later. And because let's get back to a little bit about what we talked about in the first one, right? Now the curiosity is, I can't keep doing this. And instead of giving it up, which I give a lot of credit to, instead of saying I failed, instead of saying I knew what everybody told me I would fail, I'm failing, their curiosity has peaked again. I need help. And this isn't a pitch for Kate and I. It's you on your journey. And whether it's coming out of school, whether it's 5 years in, 10 years in. By the way, I work with clinics who are older than me who have finally acknowledged I've got to do something different. And they're not shutting it down. And they're not saying I failed, and they're not saying everybody was right. They're saying, they're just asking questions. And most of the people I get on the phone with, a lot of them are saying, I don't know if there's an answer for this. I needed to have a conversation with some people. Right. And so this curiosity, this self-awareness that what I'm doing today in this business, whatever practice I've created, I need something different. That's it. It's not I need to change. It's not I did it wrong. It's just I need something different. And I think that's a great place to come from. By the way, in America, that's weakness.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think if you sort of start asking the questions about how can I do something differently, or what are the other options, or it's the answer usually presents itself to you. And it's quite arrogant, actually, for us, if we think about it as clinicians, to see it as a weakness, because we're expecting people to ask us for help when they're in pain and they're in a very vulnerable situation. You're asking people to be extremely vulnerable with you, but yet you're not willing to be vulnerable when you need help. That's a contradiction. There's a conflict there. How can both be true?
That's too good. I don't even want to say anything behind that, because that's too good. Because that's why, right? The people we're dealing with, I started something because I believed I could serve people better. Yet those people had to come to me willing to change, asking for a change, asking questions. And yet we, the owner, the person who have created this, whether it's ego, whether it's whatever it is, want to blame external things, or don't want to ask for help, or don't want to acknowledge that what we're doing currently. So I've had some conversation recently where it's, I need a change. Cool. 3-4 weeks worth of phone calls and going back and forth and looking at the business. And at the end going, I can't make the change right now because of A, B, C, and D. And I'm like, okay. By the way, A, B, C, and D are a result of doing the same thing over and
Mm,
over and not making the
mm,
change earlier. And then have the follow-up conversation default to more of the external things again. And it was like, well, it was a good place to be. And at least they're asking the questions and then showing them the results of the reasons why they say they can't go forward are based in them repeating things. Right. And I just bring this up because I'll, right. Because I went through all this. Again, I want to own this and I'll probably do this on every episode. I share all this stuff because I went through it too. And I just had a
mm,
tipping point that was too huge. I couldn't do, there was no choice. I literally had no choice. I couldn't keep operating the same way. I couldn't say no. And so
mm,
once I was forced, I'm going to say, no, I made a choice, but then the choice I made, there was no going back. So I say forced, but once I chose that route, I had to dig deep and
you were
find the
committed.
resources. Yeah. And so I want people listening to this, it starts where we started. And we got to understand this mindset of moving through this process. But once we got there, and that call with that person making over $1 million this week, it was so eye opening to me 30 years later. I looked at all my notes and I wasn't baffled. I was, my gosh, because I wrote down all the emotional stuff, right? I wrote down some of it. No, we didn't even get into numbers. I just wrote down the things I
Mm,
heard in the conversation. I can't keep doing this. I was like, holy crap, who's going to do it if you don't? Right. And by the way, it's a good model. I agree with the model. I believe this
yeah,
business is doing good for their community. So I was like,
yeah,
part of me was like, can't let this go. Right.
yeah, yeah. We find a way. We find a way. And I think what's really interesting, I know I've already touched on it with you before, the level of service culture in the US compared to the UK is significantly higher. And it's something that really strikes me. So I think it's fascinating that you guys will very willingly pay for somebody to clean your house, mow your lawn, cook your dinner, paint your toenails, and pay for things that I would maybe pay for once a year rather than every single week on an expense line. So the level of outsourcing is much greater than it is perhaps here, but yet there's not a willingness to actually, you're not actually asking for help is what you're describing. You're sort of asking for a task to be done rather than for help. So rather than asking the gardener, how do you think my garden could look better? You're just asking him to mow the lawn. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting. And yet we don't want as practitioners people to just be coming and fixing our back. We want to be able to educate them, help them, give them more knowledge, transfer a lot of wisdom to them so that their quality of life can be better. So it's really just a case of holding the mirror up and realizing, what if I took the same attitude as my ideal client? What would that open up to me too?
I think we just all need to sit in that,
Mm,
just in that right there. I think that's a perfect example of the service to the tactics to the actual solutions, asking our patients to do these things and then not asking the same things of ourselves. I think that's a
mm.
good place. So thank you again, Kate, for this conversation. And we'll continue this next week, tomorrow, whenever we do. So perfect.
Thank you, Jerry.